All right, today's lesson is just some more trigonometry, and we're going to start with angles and their measures. There are some very, very important angles that we focus on and we use constantly in trig, and it goes back to the lesson the other day about the 30, 60, 90, and the 45, 45, 90. So we're going to use those because they're used constantly in trig. I ask you what the sine of 30 degrees is, the cosine of 45, you should know that immediately. But before we get into all of that, we need to learn some terms. When I draw an angle, I draw it in the coordinate plane, and this first side, this side right here is known as our initial side, and it's always on the positive x-axis. So this is my initial side, but it's always on the positive x-axis. All right, so the initial side, so that's where it starts. Initial means beginning. If I measure the angle from the initial side and I go in this direction, which is counterclockwise, that would be a positive angle. So counterclockwise is positive. So that would make sense then. Clockwise would be negative, and I'll draw one of those in a minute. So counterclockwise is positive. And where the angle ends is known as our terminal side. In trigonometry, we use all the time, we use Greek letters, and this little Greek letter right here is known as theta. Okay, that's just a Greek letter, theta. All right, so that's a positive angle. Now we, again, draw the initial side in a positive x-axis. So this is my initial side. But this time we draw in the clockwise direction. Okay, this is still theta. This is still my terminal side. This is where the angle ends. If we go in the clockwise direction, this is what I did here, that will give me a negative angle. Okay, so clockwise is negative, counterclockwise is positive. And now we can put this in the coordinate plane and come up with some more important information that we're going to use throughout the rest of the trig lesson. Okay, so we have our vertical angle is always my y-axis. Horizontal is my x. But as far as special angles, this one right here is 0 degrees or 360 degrees, because if I go all the way around in the counterclockwise direction, that's 360 degrees. This right here is a right angle, so this up here must be 90 degrees, and it is. This one over here, another 90 degrees, so this is 180 degrees. And then another 90 degrees would be 270, and then another 90 would get me back to 360 degrees. All right, so this right here, this top right corner is known as quadrant 1. And just like the angles, we go in counterclockwise direction. This would be quadrant 2. This is quadrant 3. And this is quadrant 4. In quadrant 1, every single ordered pair has a positive x and a positive y. Quadrant 2, the x's are negative, but the y's are positive. And in quadrant 3, both the x and the y are negative. Quadrant 4, positive x, negative y. All right, so in quadrant 1 then, the angles are between 0 and 90 degrees. Now, the quadrant 1 does not include 0 and 90. They're not in the quadrant. Quadrant 2, any angle between 90 and 180 degrees. Again, they do not include those two angles. There's another term for that in a second, or a special name for those that aren't in a quadrant. Quadrant 3, any angle between 180 and 270 degrees. Again, these are all multiples of 90 degrees. Quadrant 4, any angle between 270 and 360 degrees. But those angles have a special name, the angles that are not in a quadrant, and we call them quadrantal angles. So, quadrantal angles are just all the angles that are not in a quadrant. They're angles that are not in a quadrant. So, those angles then would be 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, 360 degrees. Now these angles actually go on forever because I can add 90 onto that. That would just be 450 degrees. I can add 90 again. So they go on forever. They don't ever end. And that brings up another name, angles that actually have the same end in the same place, because if I add 450 onto that, I'm actually going to end at where 90 was. Those angles are called coterminal angles. And coterminal angles are just angles that share the same terminal side. So they share the same terminal side. And every angle has an infinite amount of angles or coterminal angles. As an example, 30 degrees is in quadrant 1, but if I add 360 degrees onto 30 degrees, I'll get right back where I was. So 30 degrees has a coterminal angle, 30 plus 360, or 390 degrees. Those are coterminal. But what if I subtracted 360? I'm just going in the clockwise direction. 30 minus 360 would be a negative 330 degrees. So very easy to find a coterminal. You just add 360 or a multiple of 360, or subtract 360 or a multiple of 360. So every angle has an infinite amount of coterminal angles. All right, so when we do some of these trig problems later in this lesson, again, those angles are so important. The key angles are the 45, if you remember our triangle, 45, 45, 90. So all these 45 degree angles on that coordinate plane are very important. So I'm going to draw a circle in here on the coordinate plane, best I can. Circles are hard to draw. Perfect. All right, so I just want to focus on this one on multiples of 45 degrees. So in other words, 0 times 45, 0 degrees. 1 times 45. Well, that's just going to cut quadrant 1 right in half, and that's 45 degrees. 2 times 45. Well, that's right here. So that's 90 degrees. 3 times 45. Or just look at it this way, 45 or 90 plus 45 is 135. 1, 2, 3, 4 times 45. 5 times 45, or just add 45 onto that. 6 times 45, it's one of my quadrantal angles. 7 times 45, and then 8 times 45, we're right back to where we were, so 360 degrees. So like I was saying before, here, this is a 360 degree angle. This is a 90 degree. If I add 45 onto that, then I'm at 450, which is going to end right here. So 90 and 450 are what we call coterminal. Then the other special triangle we dealt with was the 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So I'm going to look at those angles on this circle. So those are very important because, again, sometime in this lesson, not this lesson, but one coming up on trig, I want you to be able to answer the question cosine of 60 degrees quickly, or cosine of 120 degrees, because that's a multiple of 30. So I'm focusing now on multiples of 30. 30 times 0. 30 times, ooh, I forgot my circle. So 30 times 1 is 30 degrees. 30 times 2, 60. 30 times 3, this is not only a multiple of 45, but it's also a multiple of 30. Key angle. 30 times 4, 30 times 5, 30 times 6, 30 times 7, 30 times 8, 30 times 9, again, another quadrantal angle, multiple of 45 and 30. 30 times 10, 30 times 11, and then 30 times 12. Okay, you need to practice drawing these two circles with these angles, and that's what your homework is. One is just writing the angles, the multiples of 45, the other multiple of 30, and then all of them combined into one. Again, we're going to focus on some trigonometry soon, and I asked you what the cosine of 120 is. Number one, you should know what quadrant that is, what multiple that is. That's a multiple of 30 or a multiple of 60. We'll get into that later. All right, now do your homework. Good luck.